Good evening. My name is Juliana Teymorazi. I'm the Advocacy Fellow for the Philos Project and the founder of the Iraqi Christian Relief Council. It is an absolute honor for me to have been chosen to MC this important event, the 30-year genocide, Turkey's destruction of its Christian minorities. The Philos Project has organized this important book discussion in partnership with the Armenian National Committee of America, Western Region, American Hellenic Council, and the Assyrian American Association of Southern California. I would like to invite all of you to rise for a moment of silence in respect for all those who suffered and perished ever so unjustly during these blood-stained years. Please. Please be seated. Thank you. I would like to take a moment and welcome our dignitaries this evening. Co-Bishop Father Athanasius Tuma from Ancient Church of the East, Marshall Lida Parish. Deputy Mayor Ambassador Nina Hajikian. Ardal Chakian from the Office of California State Senator Anthony Potentino. Dr. Richard G. Havanesian, past holder of the Armenian Educational Chair in Modern Armenian History at UCLA and Presidential Fellow at Chapman University of Orange County. We thank Council Member Krikorian for hosting us at this City Hall today, and we also would like to thank Sahad Yadalia from his office for helping us with logistics. Dr. Betty Morris and Dr. George Abbey, dedicating 10 years of their lives, have produced a body of work which is historic and groundbreaking in exposing crimes committed by Turkey and their corroborators, the Kurds and other Muslim agents against the Christian communities, the Armenians, the Assyrians and Greeks, as well as the Yazidis. We, the Christians, were referred to by the Turkish authorities as cancer, microbes, the very words which were echoed by the Nazis describing the Jews years later. I would like to invite Deputy Mayor Ambassador Nina Hajikian to offer her welcoming remarks.
Good evening. I just want to welcome you to City Hall. Thank you for being here. Who is it their first time in City Hall? Oh, well, come back anytime. This is your building. And I'm really very honored to be here and excited about this event tonight because Los Angeles is all about this. It's all about pluralism and tolerance. It's a city where everybody belongs. So having these four groups come together to present such important work, and so important important because we can never let it happen again, because we must not forget so it doesn't happen in the future. And I know that Mayor Garcetti would be thrilled to see this community coming together, Assyrians, Armenians, Greeks, friends, to hear this important conversation. So thank you very much, and enjoy the evening.
Thank you. The organization, the Philos Project, which promotes positive Christian engagement in the Middle East, has organized this event in partnership with three fantastic organizations in your community here. I would like to ask Ahmed Sahakian, the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America, Western Region, to welcome you personally.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. I know it was quite a challenge to get here on President's Day, especially with the parking situation. Also, thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight with us. And thank you, of course, to our host here in City Hall, Councilmember Paul Krikorian and his office for providing so much assistance with making this event happen, as well as our coalition partners, the Philos Project, the American Hellenic Council, the Assyrian American Association of Southern California. If you missed the news, we actually signed 2 memoranda of understanding and cooperation last year with AHC and AAASC. And so this is just a natural continuation of that partnership, and we're only looking forward to hosting these type of events moving forward. So without any further ado, I'd rather have more time for our esteemed speaker. Dr. Morris, thank you so much for being here. We absolutely look forward to your remarks, and thank you to you and your co-author for the phenomenal job you have done in compiling all the work. I've gotten started on the book. I hope to finish it sometime soon, but nevertheless, I look forward to hearing the synopsis and the Q&A session to follow. So thank you again once again to all of you for being here tonight, and looking forward to the discussion.
I would like to invite Dr. James F. Dimitriou, the President of the American Hellenic Council, to offer his welcome remarks.
On behalf of the American Hellenic Council, it gives me a great pleasure, but more than that, a great honor to be here together, to stand together, to represent a new era, an era of finally achieving justice, truth, and to increase a memory that many thought was forgotten. We're here to stand together for the future by remembering our past and our joint losses. So today marks that new era. It's an honor for me, on behalf of the Council, to congratulate Professor Morris on his work. And a personal note that it was our family that lost many during that time. We were from the island of Mamara. More than half were lost, including virtually my father's entire family. This is something that can't go on. It's long overdue for us to work together, and we can only achieve more than the beginning of our memorandum of understanding. The future is ours, and the truth will be known. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dimitriou. You spoke eloquently, and we felt the pain. We felt your pain, and we shared it with you. I would like to invite Peter Warda, the newly elected President of the Assyrian American Association of Southern California, to welcome you personally.
Good evening, everybody. For my fellow Assyrians, Shalom. Thank you all for being here. As Juliana mentioned, I've literally been in office for a week and a day. So, I know most of you know Ramon Tash, who's our past president, our immediate past president. He's done so well these past 4 years to really up the community collaboration that we've got going on with all of our brothers and sisters that are in here. So I look forward to continuing that, and I'd like to thank everybody for allowing us to be a part of this evening, and I look forward to working with you all. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We wish you all the best. As Professors Morris and Zenevi began their research on the first genocide of the 20th century, they quickly realized that the Armenian genocide of 1915-1916 only is a part of a story which really began decades before and lasted for years afterwards. The story is deeper, as the other Christians, the Greeks and the Assyrians, were dealt with brutally by the Turks and their corroborators, the Kurds, just as they dealt with the Armenians. Beginning with Sultan Abdulhamid II, to the dominance of the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, also known as the Young Turks, and the post-war Turkish rise of nationalism, a movement led by Mustafa Kemal, who came to be known as Ataturk, also known, which means father of Turks. They were all able to cleanse Asia Minor of its 4 million Christians. As for the Muslim Hoja, a teacher or imam, expressed ever so angrily to a missionary who was named Ralph Harlow. He said, "We will grind these enemies, Christians, under our feet." And they did just that. By the end of this genocidal campaign, the population of Christians in Asia Minor had dropped from 20% to a mere 2%. We are beyond honored that Dr. Benny Morris accepted the Philos Project invitation to speak to us this evening. Dr. Benny Morris was born in a kibbutz called Ein HaHoresh in December of 1948. He grew up in Jerusalem and in New York, served in IDF from 1967 to 1969, and studied modern European history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he obtained his PhD from Cambridge University. He worked as a journalist at the Jerusalem Post. Over the past decades, he has also published numerous books on Israeli-Arab conflicts, including The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, Israel's Border Wars, Righteous Victims, A History of Arab-Israeli Conflict, and A History of the First Arab-Israeli War. He has spent the past decade, the last 10 years, together with Professor Ze'evi, researching and writing the 30-year genocide, Turkey's destruction of its Christian minorities. Morris was a professor of history in the Middle East Studies Department at Ben-Gurion University in Israel from 1997 to 2017, and a visiting professor of Israel Studies at Georgetown University from 2015 to 2018. He has been a visiting professor at Harvard University, LMU in Munich, Dartmouth College, and the University of Maryland. He has published articles in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, the New Republic, the Guardian, the Observer, the Daily Telegraph, Corriere della Sera, Die Welt, Haaretz, and etc. Robert Nicholson, the founder of the Philos Project, and he's the executive director. He holds a BA in Hebrew Studies from Binghamton University, and both a JD and an MA in Middle East History from Syracuse University. A former U.S. Marine and a 2012-2013 Tikva Fellow, Robert founded the Philos Project in 2014. His advocacy focuses on spreading the vision of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious Middle East based on freedom and rule of law. Robert serves on the board of directors of Passages and is the editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy. His writing, you will find it in First Things, Wall Street Journal, The Federalist, The Jerusalem Post, The Hillel, and The American Interest, amongst others. Tonight, Robert will lead the discussion with Dr. Benny Morris, so I would like to invite both Robert Nicholson and Dr. Benny Morris to the panel, to the stage.
Okay, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming out. It was a big challenge. We had the idea to do this event, and then the big question was, where do we have it? Because, you know, people in LA don't want to go very far, especially in the evening. And so we tried our best to pick something that was central. I don't know if we were successful, but I know some of you commuted quite a bit, so thank you for that. As Juliana said, I'm the founder and president of the Philos Project. We started in 2014, education and advocacy nonprofit based in New York City, so it was also a commute for me. And what we're really trying to do, there's a lot of things that we do at the Philos Project related to ideas, education, work. We bring people on fact-finding trips over to the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. But what we're trying to do at the end of the day is to create a new conversation in this country about what's happening in the other side of the world. As a Christian organization, naturally, the situation of the Christian minorities in the region are one of the most important, if not the most important thing that we work on. And I myself have been very involved in various advocacy efforts related to many of these different communities. Being founded in 2014, obviously Philos was thrown from the very beginning into the ISIS crisis, and actually Juliana led a lot of our efforts to help the Christians of northern Iraq. But a student of Middle Eastern history knows that the spirit that drove the ISIS genocide is not something new. And in fact, it's actually something quite old, at least 100 years old. And the story of what happened in the early part of the 20th century is sort of the most obvious precursor to what happened in 2014 and afterward. A big part of what we do in this new conversation is trying to tell a big story about the region that links all of these smaller stories together. A big part of what we do has to do with Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and often that conversation is completely isolated from all of these other conversations. And even the story of the Turkish genocide, sometimes you'll find that these different communities aren't themselves working very much together. In LA, all of these memoranda of understandings have been signed, and so I think you all are ahead of the curve. But what we're trying to do at Philos, and specifically here tonight, is to bring some of these different things together. And so I see a book is coming out, written by an Israeli scholar who I know as being a scholar of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Palestinian refugee crisis. But what is this book? This book is about something else that's completely different and part of a very different conversation about Turkish genocide of minorities. So immediately I take interest. I see some of the press around it. I actually track Dr. Morris down at his house, which is quite remote actually, in Israel, and we had a conversation. And I told him, look, I want to do whatever I can to get this story out for you, for the book, but particularly for these communities, and especially for those Americans who don't know the story. So that's really why we're here tonight, and I've written up just a few questions that I'm going to ask Benny, and you all, I believe, have received index cards where you can write your questions, and we won't have time to ask all of them, but we're going to try to combine a few and synthesize a few different questions so that you also have a chance to ask our guests your questions. So, Benny, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's really an honor, and he's in the middle of a lot of travel and book touring, and so it's a special privilege for us to have you. So I'm going to go back to what I said before. You are known as being a scholar of the Arab-Israeli War, 1948, among other things. The Palestinian refugee crisis, you've sort of become famous or infamous, however you want to describe it, for your work on that. Certainly path-breaking, groundbreaking work. This book is very much a different sort of story. It's a departure from a lot of your previous work. So for people who don't know you, maybe tell you a little bit about yourself beyond the bio, and particularly how you came to even write this book, you and Professor Zadny.
Well, there isn't really an explanation. I spent the 1980s, 1990s, and the early 2000s working on the Israeli-Arab conflict, and as was mentioned, I published books on the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem, the 1948 war, the whole of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I wrote books on the 1950s and so on. And eventually I got tired of the Israeli-Arab conflict about the year 2008-9. I'd written enough. I didn't think I could actually innovate much. And as I say, I basically got tired of that conflict, which to me seems unending, and I don't see an end to it, and decided to look for something else altogether. And the Armenian genocide was a subject which I'd always found vaguely interesting. I knew a little bit about it, but not much, and I thought it might be a good idea to write a book on what had happened to the Armenians. And I walked down the corridor from my office in Ben Gurion University to Dror Ze'evi's office, and since he was a real expert on Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, I thought perhaps we could join forces and do this book together, as I didn't actually have very much background, which was necessary, and he agreed to do it. And what we found in the 8 or 9 years of work on the book, which ended basically with the publication of the book by Harvard University Press in 2019, was that the limitation of the book, the restriction of the subject to the Armenians was all wrong, has been wrong for many years, and really it should have covered a look at what happened to the Armenians was basically part of what had happened to all the Christian minorities in Turkey, who were essentially eliminated either by murder or expulsion. More or less half and half of the 4 million who had lived in Asia Minor prior to 1914. And so the story really was one about what had happened to all the different Christian minorities over this 30-year period, 1894-1924. I would characterize what had happened to them, incidentally, as a genocidal ethnic religious cleansing. That's essentially what happened. But you can't use such a long phrase in a title of a book, so we shortened it to the 30-year genocide. But it's applicable also, the word genocide, to what had happened to all three communities, given the numbers of those killed, the proportion of each minority which was killed, the intention of the Turks and their helpers in doing what they did. The word is applicable, but maybe the word genocidal ethnic religious cleansing is more accurate about what happened to all three large minority groups. That's all I can say. People, I'll add one more word, one more sentence. I think at the bottom of writing the book, as I think also at the bottom of writing about for instance, the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem, there is a certain moral impulse. It's not just trying to find out what had actually happened, but that's really what we were doing. We were trying to find out what happened, and we do that as historians should through looking at archives and the documentation in archives, and then writing the story of what had happened, and that's what we did.
So some of the people here have read the book. We actually ordered a number of copies that didn't show up in time. We're going to give them away for free, but we're going to try to get them to as many of you as possible after the event. But for those of the people in the audience who have not read the book, could you just summarize the overall argument and just sort of tell the story, particularly what about your book is new and innovative, and maybe something along the way that surprised you, something you didn't know?
Well, the book is 650 pages long, so he wants me to summarize it in a couple of sentences, maybe a dozen. The book covers a 30-year period and three different Ottoman Turkish regimes. The regime of Abdul Hamid, essentially the last of the sultans. There were one or two others after, but they were unimportant. He was the last of the important sultans who ruled the Ottoman Empire. He was followed by the Young Turks with the Committee of Union and Progress, and they were followed in 1918, 1919 by the nationalist movement, which was led by Ataturk, who established the Republic of Turkey by 1923-24. And these three regimes essentially wanted the Christians of Asia Minor, the core of the Ottoman Empire, and eventually the territory of the main territory of the Republic of Turkey, they wanted the Christians out. They didn't want, and this is what Ataturk in fact told Western officers and officials who reached Smyrna, Izmir, when they conquered and were expelling the population of Izmir in 1922, September 1922, Ataturk told these officials, we don't want the Christians here, we want them to leave. Of course, they killed a lot of the Christians of Izmir before, but 250,000, the remaining 250,000, were expelled from the town and from the rest of Turkey during those same years, under the command of Ataturk. The story begins with the mass murder of 100,000, maybe more, maybe 200,000 Armenians by Abdul Hamid. It continues during World War I, when the Young Turks ruled Turkey and were fighting the Russians, the British in the Middle East. It continued then when they committed what's called the Armenian genocide in 1915-16, when, and here there's arguments about the numbers, but approximately 1 million, maybe a bit less, died during this Armenian genocide in 1915-1916 in a campaign of organized mass murder by the Turks, the Kurds, some Chechens, Circassians, and others who helped them. and then was continued by Ataturk in 1919, 1920, 23, up to 1923, when the remaining Armenians, and there were several hundred thousand who remained in Turkey throughout the war, the doctors, lawyers, all sorts of people were needed by the Ottoman state, and Armenians who had survived the massacres and the deportations to the deserts of Syria and Iraq. Some of them came back, 150,000 approximately, the survivors returned to Turkey, hoping they'd have a new life now that the Allies had beaten Turkey in the war. They too were essentially expelled or killed by Ataturk, but alongside them, Ataturk took care of over 1 million, possibly 1.5 million Greeks who lived on the Pontus, on the Black Sea coast, or along the Aegean mainly. These were either destroyed or expelled by Ataturk at the end of this process. In all three stages, especially in the two main stages, 1915-16 and 1919-1924, as a sort of a byproduct of this cleansing of Christians and destruction of Christians, the Young Turks and Ataturk also took care of the Assyrians. The first two were seen in some way as a threat, that is, the Greeks and the Armenians were seen as a threat by the successive Ottoman Turkish regimes to the state. Because they were Christians, because there was a nationalist movement among the Armenians, because the Greeks had the Greek state outside, which was an enemy of Turkey, they were seen as potentially subversive, in fact even rebellious, which is a great exaggeration, but that's how they were seen. The Assyrians weren't rebellious, were not nationalistic minded, were not subversive, but they too were killed, and the reason they were killed is because they were Christians. And probably about half of the Assyrians, they may have numbered 600,000 in the empire, especially in Asia Minor, before World War I, about 300,000 of them were killed. For no reason at all, as I say, because they weren't even considered potentially rebellious. An interesting subject which we had to deal with methodically and systematically was why the Turks went about to do this. Now, I mentioned one of them, a sense of insecurity among the Turks, the rulers of the land and the majority population of the land, a sense of insecurity born of enmity and attacks by Western powers, especially the Russians, but also the Christians who lived in the Balkans, and the Italians who conquered Libya in the years before World War I. These were seen as a threat, and the internal minorities were seen as potential helpers of these external powers. That's how the Turks saw them. They exaggerated, maybe were even paranoid in the way they saw the minorities. It wasn't based really on what was happening, but on fears of what might happen. But they used that as an excuse and the reason to kill these, essentially something like 2 million people, and to expel the remaining 2 million. We found, and maybe that's one of the original points in the book, maybe let me return first to one of the original, I think the most important innovation of the book is to look at what happened to all the different Christian minorities rather than just at one or two of them individually. In other words, Armenian historians in the past have focused and maybe even written only about what happened to the Armenians. Greek historians have written about what had happened to the Pontic and to the Aegean coast Greeks, but they didn't sort of understand, or at least write about the totality of what had happened to the Christians as one process, staggered, but as one process over 30 years, and we understood it to be that, one process, and that's what we wrote. I think that's the main innovation. A second innovation, or partial innovation, or at least an assertion which is contrary to current politically correct thinking, is the role of Islam in what happened to the Christians during these 30 years. In other words, if you like, the murderous role of Islam, of Islamic ideology, and the way Islam was understood by the people, the majority Muslim population, when they carried out the mass murder and mass expulsions, they understood it to be jihad, that is, something which was an imperative, a Quranic imperative. They must take care of, in this fashion, of the minorities, the infidel minorities, who were their enemies. And we find priests leading pogroms, priests urging on their followers to massacre men, women, and children, seminarians, people who are about to become priests, leading in the pogrom, the massive pogrom in Istanbul, for example, in 1895. The role of Islam is very important, and even Ataturk, who later had a reputation for being a secularist, an anti-Islamic leader, and did try and separate church and state and diminish the importance of Islam in Turkey in those years, 1919, 1924, used Islam and spoke the language of jihad as he was telling his people to go about their murderous and expulsionary activities. So Islam is very important here. It's also important, incidentally, in the conversion. That is, the whole idea of conversion, of forced conversion of Christians to Islam, which occurs in all three bouts, the 1894-96 Abdul Hamid massacres, the genocide during 1914-15 of the Armenians, and the anti-Christian crusade 1919-1923. In all three, you find tens of thousands of Christians being forced to convert to Islam. Again, something which is Islamically motivated. It didn't necessarily, incidentally, save all those who converted. Some of them were converted and then were killed afterwards as a sort of an afterthought. But they wanted to insult them as well, so they first converted them, forced to convert, and then killed them. I think I've spoken enough on that.
Was there anything that surprised you that you didn't expect to find that you found?
Well, we didn't know when we both approached it. Dror Zeevi is an expert on 17th century Ottoman Turkey, on the Ottoman Empire. And I'm no expert at all. I was no expert at all on Ottoman history at all.
Cedevit, a Turkish leader, became known as the horseshoer of Başkale, as he had invented or resurrected the torture of hammering horseshoes in the Christian feet. In March, the Assyrian men in the village of Gulpashan were executed in the cemetery. A missionary described what happened in the nearby Charbusha. In the yard, Lucy, who related this to the missionary later, saw her sister Shireen, a pretty little girl of age 15, being dragged away by a Kurd. She was imploring to Lucy to save her, but Lucy was helpless. Shireen had tried to conceal her face, and she had covered it with mud, but she had such beautiful dark eyes and rosy cheeks that she was discovered. A Russian official, after inspecting 20 Urmia sites, wrote in his report, "The villages were full of victims of massacre. The corpses bear the marks of cruel killing with axes, daggers, and blunt objects." It is important to also remind you that the Kurdish leader Agha Ismail Shasheknia, also known as Simku, murdered the Assyrian patriarch of the Church of the East in March of 2018. We spoke of Israel, and there's been a lot of talks for the past year about Israel potentially thinking of recognizing the Armenian genocide. We hope that they will, if they do, they will include the other names as well. But what are your thoughts? Do you think that the state of Israel will recognize the Assyrian, Armenian, Greek genocide? If so, if not, or how can we participate and make that happen?
I don't know how one can affect Israeli government policy, but I've always thought that Israel's non-recognition officially of the Armenian genocide was morally unacceptable and a mistake, and hope that it changes. I think Israel will do that eventually, but it should have didn't do it for reasons of realpolitik, economic and military relations with Turkey and so on. But as I say, I think this is wrong. It's morally reprehensible. and they should do that. Whether they can add to that the Greek and the Assyrian elements of the genocide, I don't know. I don't know of many governments around the world who've actually officially recognized the Greek and Assyrian genocides as part of this pan-Christian genocide. I don't see that happening, though maybe our book will be helpful in this sense, because as I say, very few people know until now about what happened to the Greeks or the Assyrians under Turkish rule. This is something which wasn't published. That's a good question, why Greek scholars haven't managed to break into Western consciousness as Armenian scholars did over the past 30, 40 years, in telling the tale of what happened to their minority communities in Turkey. I don't know why that didn't happen. The Assyrians, it's more understandable because they're a very small community. I don't know how many scholars they've produced. Maybe they have produced scholars, but it's more recent, their scholarship on this subject. The Greeks have been a state for a long time, have academic institutions for a long time, and somehow it hasn't penetrated in the West that this also happened to the Greeks during those years.
The 30-year genocide, 1, documents the 30 years of crimes committed against the Christians in the most academic and historic manner. 2, Armenians have been truly on the forefront, and we're really grateful for that, to the Armenian community and advocates, advocating for the recognition of this genocide. The book emphasizes that Assyrians and Greeks suffered immeasurably as well for their faith and ethnicity alongside the Armenians. 3, this book documents the atrocities committed by the Islamist and nationalist movements of the Turkish leaders in 3 different eras. 4, as the Kurds are hailed heroes in the West, and as many stand by and advocate for and alongside the Kurds, this book eloquently highlights the Kurdish full cooperation and involvement in the destruction and expulsion of their neighbors, the Armenians, the Assyrians, and Greeks. This remarkable work is that published by Harvard Press should be truly, truly read, not just by academics, by us all. You can access this book on Amazon. As Robert had mentioned, we weeks ago ordered this book to be made accessible to you, but unfortunately they did not make it on time. But you can definitely access this on Amazon. As countless of you present in this room, my own family also directly was affected by the atrocities committed against the Assyrians in Ormia. 6 members of my own family were either tied to a horse and dragged through the streets. They were shot to death. My great-grandmother, Miriam, was burnt alive by the Turks, and her sisters were violated and killed by the Kurds. We thank you, Dr. Morris, and we thank Dr. Zaevi for this historic work and your unprecedented contribution to our 3 communities. Thank you, and have a good evening.
All right. So thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
600 page.
650.
600. How long took you to write that 650?
About 8, 9 years.
8, 9 years.
2 of us, 2 people.
Okay. So the name Turkey, did exist that name during Ottoman Empire?
Yes, the area was known as Turkey or Anatolia, or they used that word, yeah. But because they were Turks, so they used the word Turkish areas, or I don't know if they used the actual word Turkey, but they used Turkish areas and Turkish people.
Yeah, but the name Turkey didn't exist.
No, I don't think it was used in pre-Ataturk. I don't think it was actually used. It was called Anatolia, the area.
Right, right. Now, I asked this question to...
Well, that's a question. I don't know that. I'm not sure.
Well, you have to research it.
Okay.
Next time I see you, I'll ask you that.
Okay.
Or you could email me.
Okay.
You know, I give you my card, right?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So I ask always Turkish intellectuals, when did you get to know Armenian genocide happened? Most of them said, we had no idea 30 years ago what happened.
Yes.
Because, you know, Ataturk prohibited talking
Yes,
even
yes.
about that. In Israel, do Israeli average people know about Armenian genocide?
No, but they also don't know Israeli history. people don't know history. Most people don't know history properly. In America, you'll find Americans who don't know really who George Washington was.
Oh, they don't know even the vice president.
Yeah, or in England, you find a certain percent of the people don't know who Churchill was. So that's normal. But the genocide thing isn't the same thing. The Turks were prohibited from knowing about what happened to the Armenians or the Greeks or the Assyrians. It wasn't publicized. There was active measures against people who wrote things about it. So it's not the same thing. There's simple ignorance and there's willful ignorance, and it's a bit different.
Books is already been published?
Well, yes, you can see there's copies here.
I can see it.
Yes, people have
Normally,
copies here.
I'm a journalist. I do interviews. They send me the book. I read
You
them.
see, he's holding a copy. This guy's holding a copy of the book. See, that's the book.
okay.
It was published
So
in
how come
English.
you didn't
It
give
came
me
out.
one?
I didn't give it to him. The book was published in English and has come out in Italian.
Oh.
And it's coming out in Greek maybe next year, and in Hebrew, I think, also in about a year's time.
Well, thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate that.
Pleasure.
I am Robert Nicholson. I'm the founder and president of the Philos Project, the organizer of this evening's event. And I was actually born in Los Angeles, but moved away when I was small to upstate New York. And I am a Christian, a Baptist actually, who founded this organization to educate and advocate on behalf of important Near Eastern issues, a big part of which for us are the strengthening, the preservation of the Christian communities of the region. So we take people from here over to the region to educate them on the ground, journalists, policymakers. We also do events like this one, and then we advocate for various issues. So this for us is obviously the remembering of the genocide 100 years ago informs all of our work, and it's important that more people know about it.
Give me some example what you guys did to the Christian community in Middle East, say Iraq or Syria.
So we were founded in 2014, and so a lot of our initial efforts were focused on the Christians of northern Iraq. It's hard to describe in a few sentences all that we did. There was a lot of government lobbying, both in this country and in some others. We also raised aid for Christians, and we built some homes in the Nineveh Plain for refugees. We sent some aid over there. We also are working with Christians, particularly those Palestinian Christians, those in Gaza, trying to help them get out of Gaza. It's a very difficult situation for them there. And also helping those who've escaped. We're trying to help strengthen the Christian communities living in Israel, also in Egypt as well. We've brought people there, and we've helped bring them here to speak and to advocate in Washington, D.C. and some other places.
In northern Iraq, there is a village called Havriz. It's Armenian Christians.
Was that right?
Do you know about it?
No, I don't. I did meet a few Armenians while I was there, but I have not been to that village. Armenians are everywhere.
They've been there since the genocide.
Is that right? What's
Yeah.
the name of the village?
Havriz.
Havriz, no. I've been to Burj Hamud
Yeah, that's in Lebanon.
in Lebanon.
Actually, in Lebanon also there is a place called Anjar. It's Armenian community. It was from genocide. The French settled them there. And
That's near Zahle, I think, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
I know
yeah.
of it. I've never been there, though.
yeah. Okay, well, it was nice talking to you. I just
too,
want to
Robert.
know who you are, and great, lots of people you guys brought here,
Yes, no.
which is good.
Thank you for
Yeah.
coming. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Years.
30 years of genocide, that's where in between all this happened. Now tell me who you are and your organization.
So it's an honor to speak with you. Thank you for attending our event. My name is Juliana Teymorazi. I'm the Advocacy Fellow for the Philos Project, which is the host of this event in partnership with our three communities. I also am the founder and the president of an aid organization called Iraqi Christian Relief Council, where I serve the persecuted Christians in Iraq as a result of Al-Qaeda and ISIS genocide.
I ask your boss, I guess I would say, about a village, Armenian village, northern Iraq, named Havriz. Do you know anything about it?
No, where was it? Where is it exactly?
It's somewhere close to the Hook.
Okay.
And their parents, they came during genocide.
Oh, they came
And they
from
built that
Turkey.
village.
Yes,
And they're surrounded with some Assyrian villages too in there.
yes. What is
So-
the population there? Is there anyone
I
left?
don't, maybe there is, they went through different cycles during Saddam and Kurds, but maybe 250 families lived there.
Oh.
And they were the only Christians. The Islamic State could not defeat them. They survived without help from anywhere.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
The survivor stories are really phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're not highlighted so much. Mostly the victims' stories are highlighted, but we really do have to do justice for those who fought back and did not.
So do you work with this Assyrian Association stuff, or you just separately work?
No, I mean, I work with different organizations, putting up events on different fashions. I work with them. If they are an aid organization, I help funnel some of the aid to Iraq. So yes, I'm very connected to the community, absolutely. I'm so happy now to be connected to Anka. I've known of Anka for the past 12 years or so that I've been involved, but I'm so happy that Anka is doing such tremendous work, and you, the Armenian community, have been really on the forefront of advocating to have the world really recognize the Armenian genocide. So it's an honor to partner with
So
you.
you're trying to catch up.
Unfortunately, because we're a stateless people, because we have been
Well, but-
so beat down for so long, we're just starting to do this. But you know, we suffered just as much as you did. Your numbers were much larger than ours, but it's great. It's great that we're now working together.
Actually, our state didn't do any much. It's all is diaspora Armenian.
Yes,
who
yes,
did that.
diaspora is absolutely.
We are
voice of the
we are
diaspora.
helping our state. Our
Yes.
state. Not,
In fact, I must tell you, I was in Armenia last April. We went to Yerevan and the areas around.
there is a lots of Assyrian community.
Yes, we went to Dujun, a small village, and Arzani, another village. But truly, personally, I fell in love with your country. And I did a Facebook Live, and I said, I wish all of you Armenians would come to this beautiful country of yours. And I've been promoting tourism for Armenia because it's an absolutely beautiful country. God bless it. God bless you and your people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
You were great. Thank you.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you
too,
very
you
much.
too.
Thank you. I know how to say parev, each business.
That's good enough.
2 words only.
And I know how to say shalom alaikum.
Oh, besmegano. Thank you.
Labayam palge dinare.
So nice.
Okay.
So nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
Thank you so